by early 1775, the uneasy peace between the American colonies and Great Britain had collapsed into open hostility. The skirmishes at Lexington and Concord had ignited the Revolutionary War, and both sides prepared for the next inevitable clash. In Boston, British troops fortified the city, while colonial militias surrounded it, forming a siege. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and rumors spread that the British planned to seize the high ground overlooking the city. The hills of Charlestown became the next focal point of conflict, where control meant dominance over Boston Harbor and the surrounding countryside. As June 1775 began, General Artemus Ward and his officers received intelligence that the British planned to occupy the hills of Charlestown. Acting swiftly, the Massachusetts Committee of Safety ordered an immediate move to fortify the high ground. Colonel William Prescott was chosen to lead a detachment of about 1,200 men from the militia and Continental forces. On the night of June 16th, under the cover of darkness, they quietly crossed the Charles River to Charlestown Peninsula. Their goal was to build defensive earthworks before dawn, a desperate gamble to gain advantage before the British could react. Throughout the night of June 16th, Colonel Prescott's men worked tirelessly to build their defenses. Using picks and shovels, they shaped the earth into a rough square redoubt facing Boston. The sound of digging carried faintly across the harbor, but the British in the city mistook it for routine labor. As the hours passed, the outline of walls began to rise, and sweat mingled with the dirt on the men's faces. By dawn, a strong earthen fort stood on Breed's Hill. Not Bunker Hill, as originally planned, but close enough to threaten the British position in Boston. Exhausted and hungry, the men watched the first light reveal their work, and the British fleet below, now fully awake to the danger. When the sun rose fully over Boston on June 17, 1775, the British command was stunned to see fortifications on Breed's Hill. General Thomas Gage, governor of Massachusetts, immediately ordered a counterattack to drive the colonists out. Major General William Howe and Brigadier General Robert Pigot were assigned to lead the assault. British warships in the harbor opened fire on Charlestown to soften the defenses, their thunder echoing across the water. Red-coated troops began to assemble along the shore, their bayonets glinting under the summer sun. It was clear that the British intended to crush this rebellion in one decisive show of force. As the British forces gathered for their attack, the colonial troops prepared for the worst. Colonel Prescott moved among his men, reminding them to conserve ammunition and wait until the enemy was close. They had little powder and few bullets, so every shot would have to count. The heat of the June day bore down as sweat dripped into the dirt trenches. In the distance, the red ranks of British soldiers began to move toward the hill in perfect formation. The colonists crouched behind their earthen walls, hearts pounding, knowing they would soon face the might of the British Empire. The British troops advanced up the hill in neat gleaming lines, drums beating and bayonets fixed. The colonists waited in silence behind their fortifications, holding their fire as ordered. When the red ranks reached striking distance, Prescott shouted the command to open fire. A devastating volley erupted from the colonial lines, cutting through the British front ranks. Smoke filled the air, and the redcoats staggered, many falling before they could return fire. The survivors retreated down the slope in disorder, their precision broken by the deadly accuracy of the defenders. After regrouping at the base of the hill, the British officers rallied their men for another attack. The cannons from the ships renewed their bombardment, blasting smoke and fire across the slopes. Once more, the red lines began to climb, stepping over the fallen from the first assault. The colonists held their fire until the British were close, then unleashed another deadly volley. Again, the British ranks wavered, torn apart by the accurate musket fire from behind the earthen walls. For the second time, the attackers fell back in confusion, leaving the hillside littered with their wounded and dead. As the smoke cleared from the second assault, the colonists realized their gunpowder was nearly gone. Muskets were being loaded with anything that could serve as ammunition. Nails, scrap metal, even pebbles. Colonel Prescott and his officers walked the line, steadying their men and preparing them for another inevitable attack. British ships continued to pound the hill, their cannonballs tearing into the defences. With every blast, the wall shook, but the defenders held their ground. Over the horizon, redcoats were forming once again, regrouping for a final push. The colonists knew they would soon have to face them, this time with almost nothing left to fire. The British advanced for the third time, slower but more determined than before. Their ranks climbed over the bodies of the fallen, faces set in grim resolve. The colonists waited until the enemy was nearly upon them, but few had powder left to fire. When the British reached the walls, a brutal struggle broke out. Muskets turned into clubs, and bayonets flashed in the smoke. Colonel Prescott called for his men to fall back only when their position became hopeless. Despite their exhaustion, many fought hand to hand until forced to retreat from the redoubt. The British finally took the hill, but at a staggering cost that stunned both sides. As the colonists withdrew from the hill, the scene was one of exhaustion and heartbreak. Men stumbled through the smoke, carrying the wounded and helping one another down the steep slopes. British musket fire followed them, but the retreat was disciplined and steady. Prescott and his officers tried to rally stragglers, ensuring no one was left behind. Behind them, the British raised their flag over the shattered redoubt, signalling victory. In Charlestown below, houses burned from stray cannonballs, their flames painting the night sky orange. The colonists regrouped across the Mystic River, bruised but unbroken, watching the hill that had cost so many lives. When the smoke finally cleared, the true cost of the battle was revealed. The British had taken the hill, but nearly half their force lay dead or wounded. The slopes were carpeted with red and blue uniforms alike, mingled in silence. Officers walked among the fallen, calling out names, their voices breaking. The colonists, though driven off, took grim pride in what they had done. Ordinary farmers standing their ground against one of the world's strongest armies. Across the colonies, news of the battle spread quickly, sparking both grief and determination. What was once a protest had now become a war for survival. In the days after the battle, Boston was a city of mourning and disbelief. The British held the ground, but at a price that shook their confidence. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers, and the streets were filled with whispers about how fiercely the colonists had fought. Across the harbour, the colonial forces regrouped, reorganising their lines and fortifying new positions. For the first time, they realised that the British army could bleed, and that courage could stand against power. General Gage, though victorious, faced growing doubt among his officers and fear within the city. In the countryside, news spread like wildfire. Farmers, merchants and blacksmiths alike took up arms, determined to defend their homes. Letters from the front described the bravery of men who had faced cannon and bayonet without retreat. Even in defeat, the battle became a rallying cry, uniting the colonies in purpose. From the ashes of Charlestown and the bloodied slopes of Breed's Hill, a new sense of identity emerged, not as subjects of a king, but as a people ready to fight for their own nation.